Come round. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Dan Bloom, a political editor at Politico, but you've had quite enough of me tonight. We are handing over to Anne McElvoy, my colleague, executive editor at Politico, and Sam Coates, deputy political editor at Sky News, for a live version of the Politics at Sam and Anne's podcast. So,
bring it on! That's great. You've done your bit now. Thank you very much, Dan. Yes, hi, I am, and welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne Live, the in-person pub interactive edition of the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in a timely manner.
She's Anne McElvoy. I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Look, it's a total pleasure to be here. Thank you very much indeed to Politico for having us, because normally we have a very, very different view of each other. It's the weirdest product you could ever imagine doing this podcast. I normally peer at Anne down a Zoom at 6:40 in the morning.
It's a lovely sight there.
I've just rolled out of bed. I'm certainly not wearing any makeup. I'm used to you being in a building site in your kitchen or in a German hotel with, you know, Wi-Fi that questions the national stereotype. It's quite the experience of being in somebody else's life, but there's nobody better to share it with.
Oh, well, there once was. He was called Jack, but we're over him.
This is my...
I'm here, you know.
I know.
Jack is actually my first marriage. This podcast started 2 years ago at this conference as a weekly where we looked ahead to the week ahead in British politics. Around our kitchen, my kitchen table, at some point after the general election was called last year, we agreed to turn it daily into this epic monster that now goes, whenever Parliament is sitting, we pop into your feeds hopefully before 8 in the morning to give you everything that you need to know. We go through everything, don't we?
Right.
So that you don't have to. We read the papers, listen to the bulletins, read the spins, get in touch with advisors at impossible hours in the morning, all to try and arm you for the day ahead.
Read the text saying what was wrong with what we said yesterday. Think about what we're going to do about that. And we pop up a lot, don't we? Which is since we've started to do more and more, we pop up a lot at this kind of event, and hopefully on the days when people like a really quick reaction. So after the leaders' speeches this week, and to get us into the week.
So we promise this is an interactive edition of the podcast. We do actually genuinely want to hear from you. What can we do better? What can we do more of? What questions do you have? What do you like? What would you rather change? It's an incredibly unusual audience that we have. There are mornings where you get replies from cabinet ministers within an hour of the podcast going out. One person has gone in and done a vibe analysis of whether or not we're positive, negative, or neutral about the Labour government, going back through every edition through this year. And you know, to give you an example of the kind of interactivity that we have in private with our listeners, I did a story last week, because we try and break stories on the podcast. I did a story last week about Morgan McSweeney, and I said at the start, this will probably put the cat amongst the pigeons, because the story was that Keir Starmer attempted to demote Morgan McSweeney. What happened was he put Darren Jones in number 10, and there was for a period a plan to make Morgan McSweeney report into Darren Jones. I think Morgan found out about it, went to Keir Starmer, got it overturned. And a few hours later, I got a text from a very senior cabinet minister, and it was just a cat's face and 3 pigeon emojis. And that's the kind of interaction that we get from people.
Which is tragically not broadcastable. Could you please all switch on your cameras now to see a picture of a cat? That's a great example, isn't it, of people really engaging with us very directly. And often quite sort of to expand stories that we've put out there, which is, I think, is just a really nice thing about podcasting, that the audience is closer to you, perhaps in a lot of linear radio that I've done and still do a lot, but that's a bit more you try to figure out what interests your audience, and then you go and sort of tell it to them in this sense, with people coming back directly. But some of the names are being changed here to protect the guilty, but where I did a story about Tim Allen being appointed to Downing Street, to the easy and enviable role of the Prime Minister's chief communications person at the moment. And that was, behind the scenes, there was quite an argument about what that role should be, how would it interact with a new head of government communications, David Dinsmore, coming in from News UK, which is popular in some parts of Labour, but the Murdoch Empire not entirely popular in all parts of Labour, etc. And basically, there were all sorts of moving parts to this. And we then found that almost everybody involved had been sent the sort of transcript with the bit highlighted about them. So a bit like Sam suggesting, we then spent the rest of the day, one morning, as just when we were sort of coming down from the caffeinated high, saying, "Oh no, I'm so pleased you heard it." No, it was really like, I was hoping you wouldn't hear that bit. But that is a really nice thing, we chant our arm. We always sort of have done since did it, and I know Jack did before. It's like, it is a podcast, and you sometimes do have to sort of go out there and say things. You delight some people, you won't delight others. But we are informed, and we want to be even better informed. So any sources you've got, you're welcome. Come. We're very reliable.
Right, that's enough about us. So on with the show. And we're going to pick up some of the things that are going to dominate this week. But also what we try and do is give you intel before it's public knowledge. So one thing before we get started on the main themes of this week in conference, I've picked up that there is discussion of yet more change in number 10 and number 11. There's a big figure around here, and many of you will know who it is. That's Ben Nunn. He is Rachel Reeves' head of communications. And it looks as if after the budget, he may well now go back and work in number 10 alongside Keir Starmer. This matters because it means that Rachel Reeves probably is on course to lose one of her big allies, one of her big figures. But it's also a sort of coming home for Ben Nunn. He was Keir Starmer's first director of communications and one of the very, very few long marchers that has gone along almost the entire journey with Keir Starmer since he ran for the leadership. Ben has been by his side since Keir Starmer was in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. So the potential there for big change, it'll leave a problem for Rachel Reeves, but something that I think Ben is mulling over at the moment. So we'll see whether that happens, but probably, I would imagine, after the budget that's coming along. So that's the kind of intel that we deliver on a hopefully as often as we can daily basis.
And can I just chip in something on that one? Because see, this is what happens. We always have an argument afterwards whether Sam splained me or I ansplained him. It depends on the day and the levels. See, some people would say on that. Some people in this room know exactly who Ben Nunn is, and others will be like, okay, yeah, I reckon that sounds interesting. There's a switch. But then, I have met people, even the hard folks, who say, why does this stuff matter? This is the kind of really more small ball stuff. But I think that is a sort of, I think that's a misunderstanding. I think one of the reasons, for instance, our playbooks are so widely read is that we understand the relationship between the small and the bigger picture. And what I make of this, I don't know if you even know whether you agree on this, because we sometimes don't, is it's a sort of an odd dynamic at the moment between, it's a one in, one out policy, isn't it, between Rachel Reeves' comms team and Keir Starmer. And my reading of that is that analytically they're trying to figure out what the problem is as to why Keir Starmer can't communicate the economic message. And at the Rachel Reeves end, there's a bit of a sense after what happened with the welfare bill, etc., that really tough time that she had and the knock that she got is she being supported enough by the number 10 machine. So I think a lot of these moves, like a very complex sort of chess configuration, are aimed at sorting out a bigger problem. So that's the real, I think, might be going on there.
No, I think that's fascinating, and I'm sure that's right. I'm going to get you in a second to sum up what you think this conference is about. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about our disagreements and a little bit about how we work behind the scenes. And I'm actually going to tell them the other AI story, not the one about the effect, but the
right.
Yes.
Right.
Because actually balance and fairness is important. And so actually at one point I did actually check to see, I actually ran transcripts of the podcast through AI, uploaded loads of different versions, and then I asked it, who talks more?
Who talks more sense would have been an entirely different ask.
And ChatGPT told me that I actually talked a bit more, 55% to Anne's 45%
This has
on
never
average.
been said about me anywhere else ever.
No. But then I did something incredibly dangerous. I then typed into ChatGPT, off my own back, there had not been any allegations. Are there any examples of Sam mansplaining Anne? Just to see what happens. And it, in that incredibly friendly American upbeat way, it said, "What a bold question. Thank you for asking that. That's very brave of you. The good news is that there are no examples of you classically mansplaining Anne McElvoy. However, on these 12 occasions, you either changed the subject or didn't engage with what she said or moved on too quickly or ignored her point, and here they all are. It's like, rah!
Just like now.
Anyway.
The algorithm, of course, was written by Blair, wasn't it? No, but it was a great example, wasn't it? And it then took on a life of its own, didn't it? Because we then started to find
it was making up
AI was
episodes,
starting to make up podcasts because it thought that we were quite attractive to somebody. And, but that was also, it was a bit of a learning curve about AI for me. Should we come back to what might be going on here, apart from us? What's it about? It's the Save Our Kia, isn't it? I mean, this is if I use the word vibe because it brings Sam out in hives, I actually believe in atmospherics perhaps a bit more, and some thought, no, this will follow, from something else, and I think it's, as always with politics, it's an art and a science, and somehow it meets in the middle. But that sense that Keir Starmer, I was really fascinated today when we've been talking about it in podcast and will in the week, I'm sure, about one, trying to move to the position where Keir Starmer could use the word racist and immoral about reform. And I think that's going to get, the version of that we're going to hear from Keir Starmer doubtless in his speech, I think will rouse the hall. I think they've been waiting to hear that. They're fed up with being in the boxing ring, back on the ropes with Nigel Farage knocking them about. They want to see a fight and they want to see Keir come out swinging. So he's taken something of a risk in doing that. Particularly, we know that there's a large chunk of Labour voters from the last election and target voters and people they want to bring back and have a conversation with, who at the same time you put the R word next to them. I think that will be really interesting how that plays out. But when you heard it at the Lib Dem conference, Sam and Zach Polanski and the Greens has a similarly hostile message. I think there was a worry that they were getting left behind. And in a way, a reform drift to the right, my belief is that because of the competition from Tommy Robinson and his even more out there English ethno-nationalists, has driven reform into some more right-wing positions on indefinite leave to remain things last week. And that now that's an opening as Team Starmer see it to have a swing. Then you really have to follow through. And we've seen Shabana Mahmood today really talking out there about deportations and deportation targets. So you could say that's a bit of a contrast or a paradox, because you've got the Prime Minister saying, you don't want to go over there because that's too horrible and racist and immoral, but at the same time, new Home Secretary who basically sets the bar of her success by talking about deportation targets.
It kind of hurts my head, really, because on the one hand, and you'll hear this from Shabana Mahmood when she stands up and speaks at a conference tomorrow, but you could read a preview of it in the interview that she gave with The Sun. I mean, if you follow the logical extension of what she's talking about, there could be 400,000 people who are served notices to leave the country and ultimately could be deported. 400,000 people. That is the policy implication of the things that Shabana Mahmood is talking about. But if you listened to Keir Starmer on the telly this morning, you would think that that was exactly the kind of thing that he was a bit chary of. He, of course, has this position that we cannot do anything that's not legal. You might think that that's fair enough as well.
Unless you change the law.
But of course, exactly what
Shabana
Mahmood is proposing to do, by the way, which is also what Nigel Farage is planning to do, simply change the law first and make things that are currently legal illegal. And so the big essay question for the big drive, the undoubted huge focus this government will have on migration, immigration, boats, all the rest of it, is Shabana Mahmood and Keir Starmer really actually on the same page, which is how we get to ID cards.
There's an interesting question about whether Home Secretaries for Labour can really be as campaigning and performative. Shabana Mahmood, the good thing about her is she's clearly very brave, right? She really goes out there more than anyone else that we've seen, possibly except Andy Burnham, but he's not in the cabinet. But although he'd like to be running it. But I was talking to someone who'd done this job before for Labour who said there's a real problem with it for Labour. So if you're a populist Tory Home Secretary, it's sort of fundamentally, if you go, it used to be just tough on crime, now it tends to be more on the immigration and asylum things. But your base that fundamentally agrees with you about that, right? And the only question is how far should you go without losing other people? So in Labour, you move quite quickly from a base of people who do want to hear that, but tend not to think of themselves as the reason they joined the Labour Party, or they're associated with it, or they go out knocking on doors for it. They're a bit apologetic about it. I think they want to get off that So I think here's my reading. I think Keir World, they think we can do that by getting stuff right and being more efficient and getting these things, expedite these deportation targets, etc. Something German colleagues in the room will know that's been a big issue in Germany for as long as we can remember, is once you set those targets, it's a bit like, I'm sorry, but how many did you actually achieve? Because it's actually just, the implementation is very hard. It was actually Westminster Insider did a very good podcast about the difficulties of implementation recently. So I think that is a potential danger. It's not so much that they don't agree with what they're trying to do. It's that the more she talks, the more she has to say. And I think what Keir Starmer wants to say is, we're getting on with it, but we're not nasty, we're not reforming, we're not doing it in a racist manner.
This feels very familiar because whenever I'm doing the podcast, I've got a coffee machine going off, I've got kids doing the breakfast. I don't have something to pour
no
beer at 6:40 in the morning, but it can only be a matter of time.
You do have a very active cat, though.
Which takes us briefly to ID cards. Let me just tell you quickly about that. Of course, that's the big plan. That was the big play. It was rushed out before conference on Friday. And it's to do with stopping illegal migration and people's identity. And it is a huge move by this government that was not in the manifesto. The stakes could not be bigger. But is this another example of something that hasn't been properly thought through? You would think, given the focus on identity and migration, that this was going to be a Home Office thing. But no. It is something that's going to be overseen by lucky Liz Kendall in the technology department, the science and technology department. She has the brief of sorting that out. Why? Well, I think, quite frankly, the Home Office saw a gigantic mess coming and just passed on it. And so it has all ended up in the in tray of the new technology secretary. I asked one of Liz Kendall's aides why, in what possible universe, this kind of fairly newly created department would be up to delivering such a gigantic product. And they said, well, it's great because we've got the youngest members of staff in the whole of Whitehall. It's like, I'm not sure I wanted to hear that.
It's a bit doji, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I wanted to hear that at all. And I think if there was an overarching analysis of this government, it is that the sort of tragic flaw of it was that it didn't do its homework before it got into power. But I would just raise the question whether even now in power, it's doing things, making announcements, and not properly doing the homework.
I wouldn't underestimate as well how it's in the Home Office at the high levels in terms of the people who have to deliver this and the officials, but also, of course, Yvette Cooper, who's just left the Home Office in circumstances where I think there was a fair amount of debate about her role and the way that she felt that she was doing it well. She'd got to grips, as she saw it, with a way of dealing with the small boats crisis. As she always said, it's one thing has to follow from another, enough of all of this dotting around and just, saying stop the boats and they go, oh God, I don't know, stop them. But I don't think she was a fan of this. In fact, she's on the record as saying that she wasn't. I think that she put up quite a fight to say this was not going to be the policy which would, if you like, flesh out the vision of the stopping of irregular migration that would benefit the... Thank you. Come again. And I think that is now, of course, she's a professional. She's one of the true and trusted professionals in the cabinet. She's moved over to the Foreign Office. One of her first moves was to clamp down on the use of the government jet, isn't it? Which is it's an interesting signal from a foreign secretary. She might not want to go abroad very much, but if she does, she's not going to go on the. I think there's a sort of symbolism that was going on. Anyway, the point being, I think there's a lot more disagreement with whether this policy will deliver. We should also keep an open mind on it, Sam, because we want people to come and talk to us about it. It is really hard to implement anything to do with digital ID that makes it answer the question that it seems to be aimed at, which is dealing with with the right people being able to work and claim benefits and identity fraud. At the same time as you're selling it a bit as a Brit called like a sort of all-you-can-eat guide to to what your rights are as a Brit. It's a carrot and a stick, but it's a bit odd.
Politics is also about people. You referred to the new Home Secretary. One of the things making lots of people grumpy is that Yvette Cooper has put out this edict that people are going to be able to use government jets far less often than they were before. Now, what ministers are being told is that that's because David Lammy used a lot of private jets, a lot of the government aircraft when he was Foreign Secretary. His team say this is rubbish and that he was just doing his job, and that maybe this is just what they're telling ministers who want to use a private jet. We'll see this one play out, but what there is at the moment is definite grumpiness, and grumpiness amongst shuffled ministers, amongst departed ministers, and all of that opens up our world wonderfully because grumpy people tend to talk to us. We also always have to talk to time. My alarm will go off in 2 minutes. It's actually in the next room. I've left it because the alarm is absolutely. And so you want the last word?
I do. Yeah. Well, I mean, for now I do. You guys should have the last word. But I just couldn't resist because I was thinking about David Lammy, and so we had a little list of sort of, we won't go into it now in 2 minutes, but let's do it on the podcast again this week. A sort of happiness meter. Who do you think's happy? Who do you think's not happy? I bumped into David Lammy the other night along with a lot of other people, so, you know, no sourcing here, but he was at the retirement party for Richard Moore, the head of MI6. And there was a kind of sense that he's starting this new world. In fact, almost everyone, Sam, who was, you know, in that penumbra, secret state, foreign office, circles around it, are in new jobs. So there's a really interesting, now I think some of these people actually are quite happy with their new moves, or at least content, or at least can put a smile on it. But I think one thing that Keir Starmer has to watch is you have, someone said to me about, would she be asked back to cabinet? She said, yeah, I could go back, but would he have my back? And I think that is a real question Keir Starmer has to face. All these people have been sort of moved around, including Lammy now, Deputy Prime Minister, high on the org chart, advising Keir on knockout blows on this, that and the other. But in the end, you know, do they feel secure? And if they don't feel a bit secure, I think with Starmer, that's often where working relationships start to go wrong, and you just have that naggy way.
It's 7 o'clock. Are there any questions? If not, we will
have a drink.
Very happily have a drink. In which case... Okay, Jack.
I knew. It's a rough crowd.
Congratulations on the podcast. It's a really good idea doing an early morning podcast. I left the country at the start of the year, and at that point, Keir Starmer wasn't doing too badly. And my analysis was very simply they weren't ready for government. It's obviously a lot of water's gone on the bridge by now, and they're still doing badly. In fact, they're doing even worse. Why? Like, my analysis is now out of date. So why is it still going so badly and going worse? It can't still be because we weren't prepared in 2024.
That's like
me.
That's like me launching a new topic at 21 minutes past the podcast.
Come on,
that happens.
You used to do that all the time.
Okay, one reason is that Keir Starmer doesn't actually have a very clear idea of where he wants to go. Another reason is that Keir Starmer doesn't have people around him. Most politicians have people, long marchers, who have been on the journey for a long time and they're not there. And thirdly, Keir Starmer's go-to technique when things go wrong is to throw people under the bus. And there frankly haven't been enough buses to deal with the number of people he's had to throw under them, all of which has made a very unhappy ship. I think if the Prime Minister was more of a policy person, things would be going better. But he doesn't seem to do that or like conflict amongst those around him. He hates it when there's dialectic and argument, whereas actually, you know, convincing people, dealing with, making your mind up between two alternative choices is what politicians normally thrive on.
I like to add a light layer of culture to this political podcast. And I'm going to say Chekhov. If anyone in the room likes their Chekhov. And what are the themes that I think just is so brilliant. And when you watch Chekhov play, you think, oh, I could plot politics onto it now, whether it's in a household in the Russian countryside in the 19th century, is people not seeing things they don't want to see, from which misfortune follows. And when we look at it as the audience, it's like, can't you see that kid's unhappy and there's a gun and that's really not a good idea. But I think that the Keir Starmer didn't see a lot of things. Everything on Keir Starmer. This is a team effort. When it goes well and when things go badly, it's all the fault of the team, right? But I think in his case, a number of things. The fact that we're talking about asylum and immigration and identity cards, and that wasn't anywhere in the main, and you would have covered them inside out, Jack and Politico and other teams here. There wasn't anywhere in the pledges. It was nowhere in the missions then, wasn't it? So the fact that there was a blind spot about something which was very obvious. When you saw what happened in Brexit, you'd been around the country, you should have known. The blind spot then persisted in the missequencing of the first budget. Now, you have to be very, very die-hard to say that first budget was a success. Then they argue that things that weren't a success were a success, so they waste a lot of time seeing things that it's time to see. We won't always agree on what they should be, but I think what's happening now is an absolute, awakening. I think Keir Starmer probably knows some of this, and the question is, can he get that sense of clarity of vision? In which case, maybe that helps your question, for him to know what he wants, because he cannot articulate it until he knows what it is. And I'd like to think that Chekhov said that somewhere, but he probably said it a lot better.
Which means that we have bust our time limit. The alarm
Russian,
has gone
isn't it?
off, and that leaves it just to both of us to say some thank yous. It is an incredible enterprise to do a morning podcast that is recorded between 6:40 and 7:05, and then appears in your feeds at 7:45. And I want to thank Evan, the producer who does it, and Paul and Laura and the vast team at Sky that make that happen. But there is a huge team at both companies that are the reason that we exist. We are here only because of Kate Day and Jamil and their trust in Jack and me a couple of years ago, backed by Jonathan Levy and David Rhodes on the Sky side a couple of years ago. And I was thrilled when I was heartbroken when Jack left, but thrilled when Anne
For a
came
bit,
along.
you were.
I still am. It's a delight to see you early morning, every morning, and thank
fun,
you
don't we?
all for listening, because it is the great pleasure of my life to
Can I
do.
just add a particular thanks also to Dan Bloom and all of our Playbook and Politico colleagues. You know how much we scrape your great stories and insights, because you send a
We certainly
file
do.
at 6:01, and if it's 6:02, I'm like quite twitchy. And I think that, that sense of bringing teams together and getting the best reporting analysis and putting a podcast around it seems okay to me.
Thanks
you.
very much.